I'm 32 and been married to Diana for 3 years. She's the only child of Vincent Blackwood, who runs one of Chicago's largest commercial real estate development companies. The Blackwood family is serious old money, the type that gets featured in lifestyle magazines and sits on museum boards. Their property is 4 acres in the most exclusive suburb imaginable, the kind of place where just the landscaping budget would cover most people's annual salaries. Meanwhile, everyone thinks I'm just some guy who analyzes financial data for investment clients. I tell people I make around 75 grand a year, nothing impressive. Diane and I rent a 2-bedroom place in a working class neighborhood. I drive a 2018 Toyota Camry with 90,000 miles showing. Her parents have made it crystal clear for our entire marriage that I'm basically trash who somehow tricked their daughter into slumming it. Here's what nobody knows except my lawyer and a handful of financial advisors. I own 47% of Blackwood Development Corporation. I'm the single largest shareholder. My stake is currently valued at roughly $11.4 billion. Vincent Blackwood essentially works for me, except he has absolutely zero idea. This sounds completely insane, so let me back up and explain. When I turned 24, I graduated MIT with a financial engineering degree. That same year, my grandmother died and left me 200 grand. Most people I knew from school took their signing bonuses and inheritance money and bought sports cars, went on crazy trips to Europe, started living large. I went a different direction entirely. I spent half a year researching companies that got hammered in the 2008 crash. I was specifically hunting for businesses with strong fundamentals, but catastrophic capital structures. Firms run by people who'd leveraged up at exactly the wrong moment in history. That's when Blackwood Development caught my attention. Vincent had gone on an expansion spree right before everything collapsed, taking on enormous debt to fund multiple projects that suddenly had zero buyers when the market crashed. By early 2009, he was in serious trouble. The company was hemorrhaging cash, suppliers weren't getting paid on time, and traditional banks wouldn't even return his calls. The stock had plummeted from $48 per share down to under $2. Most analysts were writing obituaries for the company. But I saw past the disaster. The real estate and holdings were in premier locations throughout Chicago. The core business model made sense. Vincent himself had a solid 20-year track record before he got greedy with his timing. What the company desperately needed was capital and breathing room, and nobody in the market was willing to provide either. Banks saw him as toxic. Investors saw him as finished. So I set up a limited liability company with a deliberately boring name, Thornfield Capital, and started quietly buying Blackwood Development stock through multiple layers of corporate entities designed so nobody could trace them back to me personally. The stock was trading for almost nothing, so my $200,000 went surprisingly far. Over the next 3 years, I accumulated 15% ownership. During that same period, I was also providing strategic capital injections through private placement deals that kept the business operational. Every time Vincent needed funding for a project and couldn't get it anywhere else, Thornfield Capital would appear with financing. He never asked detailed questions because he was desperate, and my terms were significantly better than the loan sharks circling his company. By the time I met Diana 5 years ago at a charity auction, I owned 31% of her father's business. I'd only gone to that event because a consulting client was receiving an award and I wanted to show support. Diana was there because her mother, Isabel, had forced her to attend some high society function she wanted nothing to do with. We both ended up at the bar at exactly the same time, both actively trying to escape mind-numbing conversations with incredibly tedious people. She cracked me up with this spot-on impression of her mother's affected society accent, the way rich people talk at formal events to sound more important. I made her laugh by confessing I had absolutely no clue which fork was meant for salad versus the main course. We talked nonstop for 3 hours straight, and when the event was wrapping up, she gave me her number, but included a warning. She told me her family was obsessive about money and social status and all that superficial nonsense. And if that was going to be an issue for me, we should probably just part ways now. I gave her the most truthful answer I could without revealing everything. That money doesn't define a person's worth. Character does. 3 months later, I proposed. 6 months after that, we got married in a simple ceremony with about 50 people who genuinely mattered to us. Diana's mother had desperately wanted to transform it into a massive society wedding with 400 guests, orchestras, ice sculptures, the works. Diana completely shut that down. She wanted something authentic, not a performance for strangers. Vincent gave a wedding toast that barely concealed his massive disappointment that his only daughter had married so catastrophically beneath her station. He made pointed jokes about my career prospects and my future earning potential. I smiled through every single word, knowing the man mocking my modest job was only capable of paying for that wedding because my investment fund had injected hundreds of millions into his dying company over the previous years. By our wedding day, I owned 42% of Blackwood Development. Today, I own 47%, giving me effective control over the entire operation. Every major shareholder vote, every board decision, every strategic initiative, I have ultimate authority if I choose to exercise it. Vincent has been essentially working for me for 8 years without the slightest clue. But this game I was playing came with very real costs. Diana would stress about finances in ways that were completely unnecessary. Our apartment is decent, but she'd grown up in a 10-bedroom mansion with full-time staff. Our vacations were domestic road trips because I couldn't exactly explain how we could afford trips to Italy on my stated $75,000 salary without raising questions. She handled the transition way better than I expected, rarely complaining, always insisting that our relationship mattered more than the lifestyle her parents had provided. But I could watch the strain it created, especially during family events. Her mother would make cutting remarks about Diana's adjusted circumstances and how she'd adapted to a more modest reality. Her father would tell lengthy stories about successful young professionals in his field, always making absolutely certain I understood I wasn't among them. Family dinners were genuinely brutal. I'd be seated at essentially the children's table, while Diana's cousins, all holding proper degrees from proper universities with proper positions at proper firms, would sit with the adults discussing business and investment strategy. Vincent would explain elementary real estate principles to me, like I was learning this for the first time, completely oblivious that I understood every dimension of his business better than he did. Isabel would casually mention Diana's ex-boyfriend, Dominic, who now operated his own investment fund, wondering out loud how he was doing and whether he'd gotten married yet. After one particularly nightmarish Thanksgiving where Vincent had spent 30 minutes lecturing me about commercial zoning regulations, Diana asked why I tolerated them treating me like that. I told her Vincent's opinion of me doesn't define my value as a person and that I understand something he doesn't. The most powerful people in any situation are typically the ones nobody's watching. She didn't fully understand what I meant by that, but she dropped the subject. The reality is, I was running an extended experiment. I wanted to discover who these people truly were when they believed they held all the power and I held none. I wanted to see whether they'd ever accept me for my actual self, or if they only valued wealth and social position. Every insult, every condescending remark, every dismissive glance was data I was collecting. I was observing and learning and waiting for the right moment. Last Tuesday morning over breakfast, Diana showed me a text from her mother. Isabel wanted us to come for dinner Friday evening, just the four of us, mentioned it was important. Diana's voice had that tight quality when she told me. She knows her family well enough to recognize when they're orchestrating something. I told her we should definitely go. I wanted to see what they had planned. She looked genuinely worried, suggested maybe we should cancel because when her parents get that formal about arrangements, it typically means something bad is coming. But I insisted. I had a strong feeling this dinner would be significant, and my instincts were correct. Friday arrived, and Diana spent 90 minutes getting ready, changing outfits 4 times, before settling on something that balanced respecting her parents' formality without appearing to try too hard. I wore khakis and a standard button-down shirt, the basic uniform of acceptable mediocrity that Vincent expected from someone in my position. The Blackwood Estate is the type of property that belongs in an English countryside, not suburban Chicago. 4 acres of perfectly maintained grounds, a sweeping circular driveway through gardens that definitely require multiple full-time gardeners, a house that resembles a private museum more than an actual residence. As we approached the entrance, Diana grabbed my hand tight and told me that whatever they were planning, I should remember she chose me and nothing they said could change that fact. Isabel answered the door personally, which struck me as unusual since their housekeeper normally handles that task. She embraced Diana with the careful type of affection calculated not to disturb her makeup, then acknowledged my presence like she was noting something unfortunate but unavoidable. The formal dining room was arranged for 4, but the elaborate setup made clear this was far more than casual family dinner. crystal glassware that probably cost more than 2 months of my stated rent, china that looked museum quality, enough silverware to perplex anyone who hadn't been raised learning the specific purpose of each piece. Vincent was already positioned at the table's head, wearing a complete suit despite being in his own home. That's Vincent perfectly, always performing, constantly reminding everyone of his status and authority. He stood to shake my hand with an overly firm grip, the kind men deploy when attempting to establish dominance. He remarked it was good of me to join them, phrased like I'd been given a choice rather than summoned to appear. The first course arrived and conversation remained carefully neutral. Isabel asked Diana about her position at the nonprofit organization where she directs community outreach initiatives. Vincent mentioned a new development project in the downtown financial district. I played my assigned role flawlessly, asking just enough questions to appear engaged while never asking so many that I might seem to actually possess knowledge about the real estate market I secretly dominated. Then, precisely as staff cleared the main course, Vincent produced a leather portfolio. The expensive kind corporate lawyers carry to crucial negotiations, the kind that signals serious business is about to happen. He launched into a speech about how he and Isabel had been thinking extensively about Diana's well-being, her future, how critically important her happiness was to them. Isabel contributed in discussing how much Diana had sacrificed marrying me, her lifestyle, her opportunities, her social standing. Diana attempted to interrupt, but Vincent raised his hand and instructed her to let them finish, claiming they weren't there to criticize, but rather to solve a problem. Then he opened that leather portfolio. Inside sat a stack of legal documents, and prominently displayed on top was a check. Even from across the table, I could see it represented a substantial sum. Vincent delivered a speech about how he believed in directness in business dealings. He said I seemed like a reasonably decent person, but we should be honest about what actually happened here. I'd married significantly above my station. He claimed that wasn't meant as an insult, just a statement of fact. Diana could have had anyone. She chose me, and they'd attempted to accept that decision. But, Isabel continued, they couldn't simply stand by watching their daughter struggle financially because of misplaced pride. So they developed a solution benefiting everyone involved. Vincent slid the portfolio across the polished table toward me. Inside was a professionally prepared annulment agreement, clearly drafted by an expensive law firm. Clipped prominently to the front page was a check for $500,000. He explained this represented more money than I'd earn in a decade at my current position. He instructed me to sign the annulment documents, accept the money, and move forward with my life. I'd be financially set up better than before meeting Diana, and Diana could resume a lifestyle more suitable to her background. He delivered this with complete confidence, like someone who'd never encountered the word no from anyone he considered socially inferior. The silence following his offer was remarkable. Diana appeared physically struck. Isabel was examining her manicure, probably already mentally planning Diana's reintroduction to appropriate society circles. Vincent wore a slight satisfied smile, like someone who'd just elegantly solved a complex problem through strategic application of money. I picked up that check and examined it carefully. $500,000 made out directly to me. For Vincent, this probably represented a rounding error in his quarterly operating budget. For the person he believed I was, it meant life-changing money. And that was the exquisite irony of this precise moment. The man offering me $500,000 to abandon his daughter could only make that offer because I'd pumped billions into his failing enterprise. Over 8 years, I set the check down deliberately and remarked it was extremely generous. Vincent's smile widened, like he'd known from the start I'd see reason. Then I asked, just to confirm I understood correctly, whether he wanted me to sign away my marriage to Diana for $500,000. Isabel corrected me, specifying it was an annulment, not divorce. Much cleaner, no fault determination, no ugliness. Simply a mutual acknowledgement the marriage had been a mistake from the beginning. Diana stood so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the hardwood. She began shouting at them, demanding to know how they possibly thought they could just purchase people this way. Vincent told her to sit down, that the adults were having a discussion. She's 28 years old, not a child, and he'd just dismissed her completely. She shouted back that she's an adult, and her husband was sitting right there being offered cash to abandon her, asking how they dared. But Vincent wasn't even looking at her anymore. He was focused entirely on me, completely confident he'd already won this negotiation. He said I clearly understood how the world operates, that sometimes money is simply the most honest method of resolving problems. I set the check down carefully on the pristine tablecloth, smoothing it flat. Then I pulled out my phone and told them I needed to make one quick call before responding. Asked if they'd excuse me briefly. Diana asked what I was doing, genuinely confused. I explained I was ensuring everyone at this table understood the complete picture. I called my attorney, Christopher Walsh, knowing he'd be available despite it being Friday evening. Christopher has managed my investment interests for 8 years and knows exactly how to respond when I call during family situations. I told him I was at dinner with the Blackwood family and something interesting had developed. Asked whether he could pull current ownership data for Blackwood Development Corporation. I said yes immediately, that I'd wait on the line. Vincent frowned and asked what my attorney possibly had to do with the situation. I simply replied everything and waited. Christopher came back and I switched to speaker mode. I asked him to explain to everyone present the current ownership structure of Blackwood Development Corporation. Christopher's voice filled that dining room, professional and methodical. He stated that Blackwood Development Corporation has 100 million outstanding shares. The largest shareholder is Thornfield Capital, with 47 million shares, representing 47% of the company. The next largest shareholder is Vincent Blackwood personally with 18 million shares, equal to 18%. The remaining 35% is distributed among various institutional and individual investors. Vincent stared at my phone like it was speaking an incomprehensible foreign language. He demanded to know what this information had to do with anything. I interrupted and asked Christopher to explain who owns Thornfield Capital. Christopher stated that Thornfield Capital is wholly owned by me personally. It was established 8 years ago, utilizing an inheritance, and has served as the primary investment vehicle for my entire portfolio. The current value of the Blackwood Development Corporation holdings is approximately $11.4 billion, based on today's closing market price. The silence that followed was entirely different from earlier. This wasn't shock or social awkwardness. This was the sound of someone's entire worldview shattering in real time. Diana's mouth had literally dropped open. Isabel had gone completely colorless, like every drop of blood had drained from her face. Vincent looked like someone had struck him with a vehicle at high speed. He whispered he didn't understand, his voice barely audible. I picked up the check and held it toward him. I stated he was offering me $500,000 to walk away from Diana. Then I let that fact hang in the air before continuing. I told him I own 47% of his company, that at current market valuations, my stake is worth $11.4 billion, and asked whether he grasped what that meant. Christopher's voice came through the speaker again, explaining it means I'm the single largest shareholder in Blackwood Development Corporation, that I possess majority voting control when combined with other minority shareholders who defer to my judgment, and that in practical terms I could remove Vincent from his CEO position through a simple majority vote at any board meeting. Vincent's face shifted from white to deep red. He stammered that it was impossible, that Thornfield Capital was, and then stopped mid-sentence, stuttering, his carefully constructed authority disintegrating. I finished his thought, asking whether he assumed it was an institutional investor, some anonymous hedge fund or private equity firm. I noted he never asked probing questions because the capital kept flowing when he desperately needed it. I reminded him that 8 years ago, his company was drowning in catastrophic debt, that he couldn't secure financing from traditional sources because the entire industry knew he'd overextended himself disastrously. So when a mysterious investor began purchasing his distressed shares and providing project capital, he didn't investigate too closely where it originated. I stood and walked around the table until I was positioned directly in front of him. I told him every significant project he'd completed over the past 8 years was financed with capital I provided. The Riverfront Tower Complex, my money. The Lakeside Commercial Development, my money. The suburban office parks that rescued his company during the market downturn, entirely my money. Isabel finally found her voice, asking how I could possibly be just a financial analyst who lives in a tiny apartment and drives a terrible car. I explained that I am a financial analyst. I analyze financial data for clients requiring specialized investment guidance. That's not a lie, merely incomplete truth. The apartment is modest because Diana and I deliberately chose modest. The car functions perfectly well. I don't need to prove anything through displays of wealth. Diana was crying, but from anger, not sadness. She asked whether I'd been watching them humiliate me this entire time, knowing I could destroy them with one phone call. I confirmed yes, I could have, but I wanted to discover who they genuinely were. I wanted to observe how far they'd go when they believed they possessed all the power. I looked directly at Vincent and said, turns out they'd go remarkably far. He started saying my name, that he didn't know, that I had to understand he didn't know my true identity. I asked whether it would have mattered. Would this offer be any less insulting if I actually was who he thought I was? Would attempting to purchase me away from his daughter be any more justified? Isabel was crying now too, mascara streaking down her carefully applied makeup. She claimed they were just trying to protect Diana. I laughed without humor. I said they were trying to control her. And there's a fundamental difference. I pulled out my phone and opened email. With several quick taps, I sent a message I'd had drafted and ready for months, waiting for exactly the right moment. I informed them I'd just emailed the board of directors of Blackwood Development Corporation calling for an emergency meeting Monday morning. The agenda was a vote regarding the current CEO's position. Vincent stood rapidly, nearly toppling his chair. He said, I couldn't do this, that the board would support him, that they understood what he'd built. I corrected him, what we'd built together. And I noted they also understand that 47% of voting shares support leadership change. I'd already discussed this with other major shareholders. When we vote Monday, he'll be removed as CEO, and the board will install interim executive management while searching for permanent replacement. Vincent shouted that it was his company, that he'd built it from absolutely nothing. His composure had completely evaporated and replaced by raw panic. I said quietly that no, he'd built it to bankruptcy's edge. I saved it. And I accomplished this while he treated me like I wasn't worth the oxygen I consumed at his dinner table. I turned to Diana, who was staring at me like I was a complete stranger. I apologized for not revealing the truth sooner. I said I'd wanted to tell her thousands of times, but I needed to know whether her family would ever accept me for who I actually am, not what I possess. Tonight provided that answer. She whispered my name and asked why. Why let them humiliate me when I could have simply told the truth? I said because humiliation is temporary while character is permanent. Her parents revealed their true selves tonight. They offered money to make me abandon the person I love most in this world. They valued their social status above her happiness. I needed her to witness that too. I picked up the check one final time and tore it cleanly in half. I told Vincent I don't want his money, never did. I wanted to belong to a family. I wanted to prove I could love his daughter without caring about her surname or inheritance. But he couldn't see that because he only saw someone he considered beneath him. Christopher spoke again from the phone, asking whether he should proceed with board notifications. I looked at Vincent, who'd collapsed back into his chair with his face buried in his hands. I looked at Isabel, clutching her pearl necklace, and I looked at Diana, my wife, who deserved better than parents who measured love in currency. I told Christopher yes, proceed with everything. Time for new leadership. The drive home was silent for 15 minutes. Diana sat in the passenger seat of my Camry, staring at city lights passing by. Finally, she asked how long I'd been planning this. I answered honestly that I wasn't planning anything. I purchased into her father's company years before meeting her because it represented a solid investment opportunity. Meeting her, falling in love, that was pure chance. Beautiful chance, but chance nonetheless. She said I could have told her any time during 3 years of marriage. I agreed, but asked whether she would have believed I married her for herself and not family connections. Would she have believed I loved her for who she is, rather than what she represented? She stayed quiet a long time before admitting she didn't know, probably not initially. I told her that's exactly why I remained silent. I wanted her to know beyond any doubt that I chose her when I had nothing to gain from it. I wanted her family to reveal their authentic selves, and tonight they did. She asked what happens now, to her father's company and to her parents. I assured her the company would be fine, actually better. I was installing professional management that actually understands what they're doing. Her father would be offered a consulting role if interested, with substantially reduced authority and compensation. She asked about her parents and our relationship going forward. I sighed and said that was her decision. They're her parents. I won't force her to choose between them and me. But I also won't pretend what they did tonight was acceptable. She reached over and took my hand. She said she chooses me, has always chosen me, even when she thought I was just a financial analyst with a Camry and modest dreams. I asked why especially then. She said because that version of me loved her without expecting anything in return, chose her when he thought she was just a nonprofit worker with judgmental family. That's genuine, she said. That's what matters. We pulled into our apartment complex. I told her we're keeping this apartment. She smiled genuinely for the first time since dinner and agreed. Maybe we'll purchase it instead of renting, but she liked our life. She liked being normal, liked proving happiness doesn't require mansions or luxury vehicles or impressing people who aren't worth impressing. She asked about the money, noting that $11 billion is substantial to just ignore. I said we're not ignoring it. We're doing something meaningful. She's expanding her nonprofit. We're funding community programs that genuinely help people and establishing scholarship funds for kids who want business degrees but can't afford them. That Monday, the board meeting proceeded exactly as predicted. Vincent was removed as CEO with 78% voting in favor. He sat at the conference table's end, diminished and humiliated, while board members who'd spent years flattering him voted to strip his authority. Isabel called Diana 17 times that day. Diana ignored every single call. The next day, a letter arrived via certified mail. Inside was a handwritten note from Isabel. She wrote that she didn't expect forgiveness, that what they'd done was unforgivable. But she needed Diana to know. They thought they were protecting her, thought I was exploiting her. They were wrong, terribly and completely wrong. Vincent was devastated. Not about the company, though that hurt, but about losing Diana and discovering the son-in-law he'd dismissed was the man who saved everything he'd built. She asked whether they could talk when Diana was ready, promised no more envelopes or checks, just a mother wanting to understand her daughter's husband. Diana read it twice and set it down. She asked what I thought. I said I think they're frightened and sometimes fear makes people honest in ways comfort never could. I told her I'd give them one chance, but on our terms. In our apartment, without wealth and status performances. If they can accept us as we actually are, maybe there's hope. If they can't, at least we'll know. Diana typed a response. Dinner at our place this Friday. No dress code, no expectations, just family. She showed me before sending, asked if it was too harsh. I said it was perfect. That Friday, Vincent and Isabel arrived at our apartment looking somehow smaller. Vincent wore jeans and a sweater. Isabel wore slacks with minimal makeup. They'd left their armor behind. We sat around our small dining table eating pasta Diana made. No servers, no crystal, no performance. Just 4 people attempting to determine whether they could rebuild something shattered. Vincent spoke first, saying he owed me an apology, actually several, for every dinner where he made me feel insignificant, for every comment about my career or car or background, for that check, for treating me like I was worth exactly $500,000 when I was the man who saved his company and loved his daughter. I said I appreciated that, but the apology I really needed was the one he gives Diana, because she's the one they attempted to control, whose happiness they valued less than social status. Vincent turned to Diana with tears forming. He said he was sorry he couldn't see what she saw in me, sorry he made her feel her choice wasn't good enough. She found someone who loves her for who she is, who didn't need money or name or anything except her, and that's what every father should want. He nearly destroyed it through pride. Isabel reached across and took Diana's hand. She said she'd spent Diana's entire life preparing her for a certain life, a certain marriage, and when Diana chose differently, she felt rejected. But Diana wasn't rejecting anything. She was choosing something real over something hollow. She apologized for taking so long to understand. Diana was crying but didn't pull away. She asked if they meant it because she couldn't endure another night like last Friday, couldn't watch them treat me like I'm inadequate when I'm the best man she's known. They both said they meant it and would prove it. Vincent asked to take me to lunch that week, just us. Said he wanted to learn my business philosophy, investment strategy, everything he should have asked about for 3 years instead of dismissing me. I looked at Diana, who nodded slightly. I told Vincent lunch sounded good, but he needed to understand something. I didn't buy into his company to control or hurt him. I did it because it was solid investment, and I won't apologize for being good at something he didn't know I could do. He said he wouldn't expect that and just hoped I'd teach him how I did it, because apparently he'd been running a company without understanding who really kept it alive. 3 months later, Blackwood Development announced major restructuring. Vincent remained on the board as senior advisor, but operations were handled by professionals who completely turned things around. Stock price climbed 42% since management change. Diana's nonprofit received a $52 million grant from the Thornton Family Foundation I established. We fund community programs, scholarships, and initiatives helping people where I was 8 years ago. Talented and driven but lacking resources, Vincent and Isabel come to dinner at our apartment bi-weekly now. They've learned to leave expectations at the door and just be Diana's parents instead of society figures. Vincent even started driving a modest car, joking that if a billionaire can be happy in a Camry, he can downsize from his Mercedes. The story made business news briefly, but I refused most interviews. What happened at that dinner table wasn't magazine content. It was personal, about family and values, and what matters when you strip away wealth and status performances. One night, 6 months after that dinner, Diana and I sat on our apartment balcony watching city lights. She asked if I ever regretted it, letting them humiliate me for so long when I could have just told the truth. I said not once, because now I know. I know her parents love her more than their pride. I know she chose me for myself, and I know I don't need anyone's permission to be exactly who I am. She asked who I am exactly. I told her I'm a financial analyst, a billionaire investor, her husband, and the guy who proved the most powerful people in any room are usually the ones nobody's watching. Somewhere across town, Vincent was probably working late, learning his own company from the ground up like he should have been all along. In their mansion, Isabel was probably planning their next visit, making sure not to overdress. And here in our modest apartment, we deliberately chose Diana and I were wealthy in the only ways that actually matter. We had each other, we had honesty, and we had a future built on something more solid than money could buy. Because ultimately, that envelope didn't change everything. What mattered was when people showed who they really were and what you chose to do with that information. I chose love and honesty over revenge. I chose proving character matters more than bank accounts, that the best victories are ones nobody sees coming. Vincent tried buying me for $500,000, not realizing I'd already bought his respect. It just took him 3 years and one devastating dinner to figure it out.